For the AZ 900 fundamental course, and we are at part 6 of 6, which is the final chapter in this presentation. So let's get started. All right, so first I want to take a look at the things that you might want to look at before you do a migration into Azure into the cloud. And there are two very critical things that you must be aware of and you should address before you migrate into the cloud. So let's take a look at them. First, you want to know how much your adaptation or your adoption into the cloud. You want to have an understanding of how much it would cost. Next, you want to understand the service guaranteed, what guarantee you're going to have that your services would be available for your business. So those are two critical issues that you want to hash out and iron out up front before you move into the cloud. Now, to address these issues, we're going to look at cost management through planning and management, and then we're going to look at service level agreements, SLAs, and the life cycles of the SLA. This is something we touched on briefly. I spoke about SLA quite frequently, but I have not spoken about it in any detail. So we're going to take a look at those features right now and get our heads wrapped around how to use these things inside Azure. So this is a really short chapter. It shouldn't take us too long to go through. I'll be very quick with it. So we're going to look at the total cost of ownership calculator. I'll refer to it as a TCO calculator from now on. We're going to use it to compare your on-prem data center costs and compare it to your costs in Azure if you should migrate into the cloud. Then we're going to describe the different ways you can purchase Azure products and services through a third party or directly through Azure. Then we're going to use a pricing calculator to do more trivial estimates, such as on a monthly basis or the cost for running a particular workload with a certain amount of resources. So you're able to do trivial cost and estimate with that. So the big difference between the pricing calculator and the total cost of ownership calculator is that you will be using the pricing calculator on a regular basis, and the total cost of ownership calculator would be used for a single time when you're doing your migration. So it's a one-time purpose. So please understand the difference between the two. Then we're going to look at defining some of the major factors that affect your total costs and apply recommended practices that you could use to minimize your costs of using a cloud service provider such as Azure. Okay, so let's take a look at the TCO calculator. The TCO calculator is designed to provide cost estimate that you can use to realize your benefit if an organization should adapt to the cloud or migrate into the cloud from on premises. That's the main purpose of the TCO calculator. TCO calculators strive to capture your on-premises or your CapEx expenses, and it compares it with your actual OPEX expenses if you're operating within the cloud. So this is what you would use to do your economies of scale assessment, your TCO calculator. So understand that. Now, there are three steps or processes that you need to follow when using the TCO calculator, and we're going to look at them just a moment. There it is. So first, you want to define your workloads and what type of resources you're going to need in the planning phase before you migrate into the cloud. So you want to understand your workloads as is right now on premises, capture them, and then you're going to decide what resources you're going to need in the cloud. Now you're going to make your assumptions and you're going to keep tweaking them and adjusting them. And once you're comfortable with your assumptions and your adjustment, then you're going to move over to generate your report so you could get an understanding as to what the different options and costing would be when you move in the cloud. So TCA calculator workload definition would need your workload such as your servers, your specification of your servers. You capture all that detail. You want to capture your databases, the database needs that you're going to have for CPU, for memory, so you could have the right performance. You want to look at your other resources such as storage need and networking needs. And once you capture all those resources, you could input them into your TCO calculator. Now, the TCO calculator, you adjust your assumptions. Some resources, such as software licenses, are assured. You want to see if you could reuse them. You want to put them in the scenario. You want to look at your electricity usage over a particular period of time, say, for example, a day or a week. You want to input that as well. You want to capture expenses such as your salaries for your employees and their upkeep fee, your maintenance, your security. You want to capture all your expenses, all your capital expenditures, and you want to be able to input them accurately into your TCO calculator to get a good assessment and an accurate assessment. Now, what you're looking at now is a side-by-side comparison of what an assessment would look like or should look like once you have done your TCO correctly. What we have right here is a TCO calculator where the assumptions are already adjusted, and then it will demand a time frame for you to use it, normally between 1 or 2 year. You want to measure between 1 year or 5 year, and that's a range that you could use. In this example, we're measuring capital expenditure versus OPEX costs over a 2 year period. And what this is saying, based on the assessment from the TCO, is that over a 2 year period where your capex cost is 700,000, you should see savings where your actual cost, operational cost within the cloud, would be at around 107,000. So that's like a good overview of what the TCO calculator is able to do for you. This is a good graphic illustration, and you could use it to make assumptions and make decisions before you go into the cloud. So just remember, it's a tool that you would use to do your core economies of scale by doing comparison between your capital expenditure on premises now and your Azure expense or your operational expense. You're able to do the comparison using the particular tool. So that is your TCO calculator. Now let's take a look at cost factor. There are many um, things such as subscription levels, service level channels, and how much you use a particular resource that can impact your cost. So we're going to look at a few of the things that could impact your cost in Azure. And I wanted to start out by looking at the resource type. So a resource type is a unique cost, and most resources are built on a tier process. The resources are built on a tier process. So how you use them and how you configure them for your performance is also something that can affect your overall price. So even though you use a calculator and you get a good understanding, these things can change the dynamics of cost on the actual calculator itself. Now there are metered, some usages that are metered. It's normally assigned a static cost to a particular resource, so you can see cost can fluctuate based on if it's a metered service. A single VM will use a particular CPU and it's time based, so your time is measured on a metered basis and it can fluctuate. The IP address that you lease, it also has a cost to it. It depending on how long you use it or how much you use the particular lease. Incoming ingress transfer costs or transfer fees, those can affect your costs. Outgoing egress, network traffic, rush hour traffic, all those things can impact the actual usage and cost of your services on a metered basis. So we also have to take those things into consideration when we look at the total cost of ownership and moving into the cloud. Now, your location. When we spoke about zones before, we have 4 billion zones, 5 billion zones. So your location can also affect and impact cost of services in Azure as well. Azure has 4 billion, 5 billion zones actually, with different pricing structures. And we went over those different zones, and it's based on the rate of data transfer within those particular zones. Understand that even if you deallocate a virtual machine, you will still incur storage charge on that particular machine. So this is another example where you have to be really meticulous with your assessment and with regards to the resources that you chose and the resources that you're using in Azure. So while other charges are on hold with the VM, for example, you still will be incurring storage charges for that particular VM because it still would be up and running. Now, understand we talk about regions, we talk about tier billing, we talk about billing zone, we talk about support options, programs, and offers, we talk about dev test lab. All these things can affect your costs in Azure as well, and you'd have to look at them in detail for your particular scenario just to get an understanding of what your billing and your cost is. So these are some things that can definitely affect your factor and pricing in Azure. Now, we finished with the TCO calculator. I don't want you to get confused with the calculators the way I did. So the TCO calculator is for one-time migration when you're doing an overall site comparison for your on-prem or your CapEx expenditure and also your OpEx expenditure. The Azure pricing calculator is more of a routine calculator that you would use on a more routine basis to look at your workload and your services over a shorter period of time. Let's say, for example, what a particular resource would cost for using, or a particular group of resources would cost you for using them for a particular period of time, such as a week, a month, or a day. So understand the difference between the two. So let's take a look at the pricing calculator. This is the pricing calculator. So to use the pricing calculator, you would need a clean slate. If we're going to be doing a computer assessment on a computer or some computing resource, you want to make sure that those resources are clean. There's no data on them. You're not using disk with information on it to give you false information. So you want to start with a clean slate. So let's begin. This is a perfect diagram with 4 resources that we want to do an assessment on. We're using 2 virtual machine, an SQL database, and a application gateway with an IP address. So we will be paying lease on this IP address. We will be using CPU and memory resources on these 2 virtual machines, and we also will be using storage on them as well. Then we'll be using the SQL database, which would be a metered based service, which is an example of one of the service that we just spoke about. So let's look at it at more detail, the basic requirements and examples. Now, to use the Azure Virtual Machine instance, it's similar to the virtual machine that you would use in the data center, but now you're going to be paying for it based on compute time and storage. Let's also take a look at the Azure Application Gateway. It's a load balancer. We'll be paying a lease for the IP address that we'll be using for the gateway. Also, we're going to be using the Azure database to hold inventory and pricing information. So we have a need for these resources. Now we want to get an understanding as to what it would cost. You would only need to add and configure the services that you're about to use to get a good estimate, and then you can save the report that is generated from your estimate for your particular workload and resources. You are able to export that report. You could share the result with your teammates, you could share it with your manager, or you could use it for your own personal use. Okay, so you have a good understanding of what the pricing calculator is and how to use it. So now let's take a look at the Azure Cost Management. Let's back up a little bit. Yeah, we're going to take a look at the Azure Cost Management features. So the Azure Cost Management and billing provides a free telemetry service that helps you to monitor and manage your resources and billing in Azure. It provides a high-level breakdown of the services and their associated costs that you would be using. So below is a following example of an image and a breakdown. It's normally colored in different zones, so it's easy for you to understand. And on the right, you get your pricing, and you actually get the category and pricing. So we're looking right here at your Azure App Services. You're looking at the cost, $39.64. Then you have your Security Center, your storage, your Visual Studio Online, your bandwidth, and all your costs are structured in a really high level breakdown format for you. So that is your Azure Cost Management telemetry service that you're able to visualize. Now let's move on and look at more other Azure Cost Management feature. So consider estimated costs thoroughly before deployment and before you make any commitment. Make sure you need a resource or service before committing to it. Understand how it is billed on a metered basis, for storage, for CPU time. Get familiar with those processes before you commit and make a decision. In addition to that, use your TCO and pricing calculators to help you understand metered cost and billing so you get a good understanding about how your costs would work so you could wrap your head around the total cost of ownership in Azure. Now let's move on. Use the Azure Advisor. We spoke about this before. The Azure Advisor, remember, it's used to recommend and cost saving. It's about cost saving. So it fits perfectly well under the cost management umbrella. So use your Azure Advisor to spot unused resources, underutilized resources, and configured resources to meet actual needs and not on a want basis. So you go for a need based situation when you're configuring resources. Make sure you're only using resources that you're going to need. This is a general overview of what it looks like, what your Azure Advisor looks like. It's telling you that you have a total of 7 recommendations, and it tells you that 2 of those are high impact, 3 are medium impact, and 2 are low impact. And you get a breakdown of the impacts right here. You have your high, and medium. You should have a low as well because there are 2 lows. And then you get a general understanding of what you would save if you follow those recommendations. So you have a cool cadre of tools that if you use them wisely and use them properly, they can really help you to manage your cost in Azure. So that's a good part of the cost management feature in Azure, and we covered most of the features. Now let's look at free trial and credit subscription and how they factor into the overall Azure big cost management picture. Now, quotas and limits. You can also apply quotas and limits to some resources to actually control costs, to make sure you don't have budget overruns or any additional spending that goes outside your budget. So you have those features as well that you could use to help you control your cost within Azure. You also have Azure Reservation, which is really a great tool because it allows you to save up to 75%, 72% if you choose to pay in advance versus paid as you go. So just by prepaying, you could save 72% on some services by reserving those services, and it allows Azure to plan ahead and plan resources ahead, and they share the cost with you for giving them the liberty to be able to do that. Now, you also have the ability to select low cost location. I'm not sure if this is really a benefit or if it's really a cost saving, because if you say, for example, select a service that is approximately 10,000 miles away, and then you end up with high latency and low performance, and then you have productivity issues. So there could be a trade-off right there. But in a situation where it works and you could select a low-cost location for storage or for any other resources, if there's a cost benefit into it and you could see the rewards, then by all means go ahead and use that service. Now you have Azure customer and subscription offers that provide the greatest cost and savings benefits. You have different tiered services that you could use, so that's another way how you could look at costs. We also have tags. We spoke about tags before and how you could use it mostly for organizational purposes, and you can use it to prioritize resources. Well, you can also use tag to help you identify and control costs at a more granular level on a group or on a particular resource or a pool of resources. So it's really a cool piece of tool that you could use to actually help you cut costs as well. So let's say, for example, we talk about a project, working on a project for a client, and we actually want to capture the cost for that project. Let's say, for example, there are certain resources you're using that you want to make them mission critical resources, and you want to isolate them and actually keep those resources in a region pair so you could have redundancy or great disaster recovery for those particular resources. You could apply tag to them, and you could actually store them off somewhere else, or you could store them in a cheaper location. So it's another way you could use tags to actually control costs, track costs, and trace costs as well. So tags can be used in a variety of different ways apart from just organizing stuff in a more granular manner. All right, so that covers tag. Let's see what else is on the cost saving roster. Now, downsizing is also an option. So, a general purpose virtual machine type, for example, say for example, it using the given amount of resources we're looking at here, and you are able to cut those resources in half, you would see a 50% reduction in saving for compute time as well. And if you're not using those resources and they're sitting there idly, you could cut the cost on them, and you should see those recommendation in your advisor as well. So that's another way to look at costs and cutting costs. Now, deallocating and deleting resources, I am going to go back again to the virtual machine example. So if you're running a virtual machine setting, for example, in your DevOps pipeline in DevTest Lab, and you're not working on the weekend, you want to deallocate those resources for those 2 days so they're not running and using up CPU and memory time, and you're getting billed for resources that you're not really using. So deallocate those resources. You will only be paying for storage that you use on those resources at the particular time. So you really want to look at that as an option as well. Another way I want you to look at the deallocating resource as well. If you're caught in a situation where you have to distinguish about costs, the cost of using a resource such as a virtual machine, understand that when you deallocate the resource, you're still paying for storage, but you're not paying for compute time. So you're learning two different things under this one banner for of cost saving as well. Okay, let's see what else we got on this banner. So we have deallocating resource, we have moving. So moving qualified resources and services from infrastructure as a service up to the middle tier platform as a service, where you could do more serverless processing and getting rid of resources again like your virtual machine. This can also have cost benefits savings for you in certain situations as well. Now, we also have OS licensing. If you're using Windows, for example, to run a particular operation and the requirement is not OS dependent, and you could run it with Linux, which is a cheaper solution. If it is a cheaper solution, then by all means use the Linux and cut those costs and avoid using Windows. That again is another cost management benefit that you could incur. And finally, software assurance. If you're using a piece of software that you already have a license for, and the license is covered on the software assurance, you can repurpose that particular license and use it again inside Azure without having to pay new costs for new software license. So you save on the software license as well. So that these are some core steps that you could take to actually manage and control and contain your costs in Azure. Okay, so what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to move on, and I am going to look at service level agreement lifecycle with you. Let's go over the session objectives. First, I'm going to describe the purpose of the service level agreement. We spoke about it briefly for a couple of times, the SLA. Then we're going to look at and identify factors that can affect the SLA and the tiered servicing. Next, we're going to look at combined SLA, known as composite SLAs. Then I'm going to be talking about and describing life cycle of Azure, such as public preview and general availability of services, when to use which, where, and when. So let's start with a service level agreement. Now, in principle, a service level agreement or an SLA is a mere formal agreement between two parties, a client and a service provider, in this case, Microsoft and the tenant. In Azure, all product categories have an SLA listed online. All SLAs have three basic components to them. There's an introductory section, a general terms, and the SLA details. In Azure, an SLA is a promise to keep a service available at a certain percentage level over a set time frame. In the beginning, I talk about it and I say just think of it as uptime, the amount of time that you could have your service up. High availability was a concept that we use as an example, and we talk about it being measured in percentage. Now we're taking a deeper look at it, a more granular look, where we're looking at it in more details. Now here is a percentage breakdown of what an SLA would look like in Azure, and I'm going to go through each of them so to make sure that you understand it. Now, at the SLA percentage, we have what we call 2.9 right here. At 99 percentage, your downtime would be approximately 1.6 hours per week, 3.65 days annualized at 2.9s. At 3.9s, your downtime would be 10 minutes per week and 8 hours and 8.76 hours annualized. At 3.9, 99.95, you get 5-minute downtimes, and your time cut in half, your 4.38 hours annualized for downtime. Now you go up to 4.9s and you're all the way down just an additional 9, and you're down to 52 minutes annualized and 1 minute per week. You go to 5.9 and the dynamics change drastically. 6 seconds per week and a total of 5 minutes, 5.26 minutes, you're allowed to be down on an annualized basis. And that's your service level agreement that Microsoft is posturing to you based on those percentages for each SLA. Now let's take a look at the service level agreement credits. Now, if Azure failed to keep up their end of the bargain with an SLA uptime, customers are entitled to a service credit. Just remember that the service credit is not a refund. You do not get a refund, and this credit is based on how long the outage period was for. And you have to identify the outage and you have to claim for it. You won't get credit automatically from Microsoft. You have to identify your credit and demand your credit, not a refund. Now, this chart will actually explain what the outage and percentage period would be like. Now, let's, for example, service credit percentage, you will get 10% if the service is down for less than 99.99%. You'll get 25% if it's down less than 99%. And if it goes below 95%, you get full credit for whatever you paid for that particular month for that particular service and that particular SLA that you're claiming for. Now, I want to look at just the last sentence. It's a free product such as Azure Advisor that we talk about, which is about cost. It has no SLA agreement attached to it, and that should goes without saying. You didn't pay for anything. You should not expect credit for anything in that particular situation. Now let's look at service level agreement, frequently asked question. Now, Azure status. This is where you will get pertinent details about outages worldwide or within your region. So you would have to check your Azure status periodically to find out if there was a outage in your region or to do an investigation about outage. Now, credits are not given unilaterally, as I mentioned before, from Microsoft. You will need to ID outages and file claims for credits from Microsoft or your service provider. If you're using a CSP or you're going through a third party, they will handle the claim process for you and make sure that you get your deserved credit. Now you have only 1 month to file claims with Azure for outages. So the months following the outages is the only leeway you have before you lose that particular credit. Now in Azure, you have special order application that will draw on more than one service with a SLA, and that's what we refer to as a composite SLA, a combination of more than one SLA. So let's use the same example we use when we try to do the pricing calculator, where we were using two virtual machine, an SQL database, and a load balancer. We're going to look at them now based on the SLA. It's also a good point and a good time for you to understand that the SLA on a virtual machine is 3 nines, SLA on a database is 4 nines, and SLA on a load balancer is 4 9. So we're learning more than we bargained for in this particular stint. So let's look at a composite SLA and how it's calculated. You simply need to multiply the formula, each of the SLAs, and then we're going to divide it by 100, divide the result by 100. Now you are at 99.9% twice because we're using two virtual machine at 99.99. Then we have 149s for the database and 149 for the load balancer, and your composite SLA now, if you combine all those services, would be 99.78%. So even though you have 4 9s, you wouldn't be able to claim credit for these at that level because you're doing a composite SLA with a bunch of resources. So that changed the dynamics. So that is what a composite SLA is. And below your need for a 99%, now for argument's sake, you could see that you lose percentage, or you lose some of your SLA guarantees when you started compiling and merging, concatenating resource together to form composite SLAs. Okay, so you get a good overview of what that SLA would be like. So let's move on and let's take a look at service level agreement. Now, let's look at service level agreement actually on virtual machine. So virtual machine, as I pointed out, as a 3 9 SLA, and the disk you choose can impact the SLA based on the composite model that we just went through. So you'd want to explore disk types that suit your SLA needs before selecting a disk type for usage. So if you have a particular requirement for SLA, make sure you select the appropriate disk type to guarantee you that you have the right amount of service level agreement to support your business need. All right, so for your perusal, I'm going to give you a list of composite SLAs with virtual machine and connectivity. I'm not going to focus on them except for the third one. I just want to draw your attention to something that is a little questionable. It says for any single instance virtual machine using premium SSD or ultra disk for all operating system disk and data disk, we guarantee you will have virtual machine connectivity of 99.9% or 3 nines. What I want to draw attention to, if you remember, before we were told by Microsoft that you cannot and you should not use Ultra Disk for operating systems. So I'm not sure why it is included in this equation. It's a bit confusing, but the rest of the composite SLAs are just done for your perusal. You could just look at them at your will. I won't be going through them, and I'm going to be moving on from here. I just want to give you some examples of different SLAs and different disk types that you could familiarize yourself with for the exam. Now let's look at the service life cycle. Now, public preview. Public preview is the next phase in the service life cycle, and the public preview allow you to run experiment with beta version stuff that are not yet ready for the public. So Microsoft allow you to use this product to test them and provide feedback so you could help them to improve the product for final distribution. So it is in red. Public preview are not and should not be used in production. You see this on the exam, you should be able to easily differentiate public preview or for testing to improve the product. It's not supposed to be used in production. What you actually want to use in production is general availability products. It's a final finished product where all the bugs, well, not all the bugs, we need to take that out. There's never a bug-free application, but where most of the bugs are resolved and it's fully tested and the product is sufficiently proficient that you can and mature that you can actually pass it on for production use. So general availability product is the only product you want to put in production. You never want to put a preview material into production. Okay, so we should be able to differentiate that. Now, use Azure Update to stay current and to view previews and check out cool new products in Azure. That's what it's for. So you have Azure Update and you understand what it's for. Again, I want to thank you for taking this course with me. It was a pleasure. I am going to be doing a review with my bot service. It's going to go through the entire course outline from start to finish. And if you realize that there's something that is mentioned in the course outline or in the summary that you don't understand fully, or you say, wait a minute, I didn't get that, or I missed that part, I am still not understanding it, what I'm giving you the opportunity to do is listen to the bot service running through the entire course really quick. And if you're not comfortable with something that you hear or listen to, please make it your point of duty to go back and do the requisite work and remedy that situation. You want to go into the test well prepared. I want you to score 900 or better. The better you score, the better understanding you have for future leading courses and elevated courses in Azure, because you're going to realize that they really, really rely on the fundamental course. Again, I want to thank you. I want you to leave your comment and subscribe to the button below. Subscribe, please. And if you see it fit, and you can afford it, please contribute and donate using Cash App, so I could continue bringing you good products like these, so it could help you to with your journey in cloud or in other software development. Again, please subscribe. Please comment and leave your feedback so we can improve the product. And last but not least, please remember to donate if you see it fit. Thank you. My name is Everell Morris from NetMerge, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.